Croeso Gŵyl Haf, welcome to Gŵyl, welcome back again. So today with me, I'm so excited to have Tynan Kogane, who is a editor at New Directions Press, which are our first American publishing press to feature at Gŵyl Haf. And in particular, New Directions have been around a long time, especially for an independent press. So we're going to sort of be delving into that a little bit more and sort of exploring the American market for translation and seeing sort of what comparisons we can draw out of there. So thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So why don't you start with a little bit about New Directions and then also about your role as an editor there? What does that kind of look like on a, if not day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
Yeah, cool. So New Directions is celebrating its 85th anniversary this year. So it was founded in 1936 by a guy named James Laughlin, who was associated with a lot of the interesting modernist poets from the early 20th century. One of his early mentors was Gertrude Stein, who introduced him to Ezra Pound, who said that he should start a press and publish him and his friends. And so New Directions was basically founded to publish Ezra Pound and his kind of posse of poets, which included William Carlos Williams, among several others, and it kind of just kept growing out of that. Ezra Pound and Williams recommended that New Directions start publishing translations because there was a big lack in the market even back then for translation stuff. And so in the 30s and 40s and 50s, there were more sort of modern classics, there would be a new translation of Balzac that had never been done before, stuff like that. And the focus at New Directions has always been finding experimental, avant-garde, things that generally other publishers wouldn't dare to publish because they're too weird and there's no expectations of them, making money or finding a market outside of this kind of niche avant-gardist tradition. And I guess more recently, the publisher has been Barbara Epler, and she's really kind of revitalized the original mission of publishing some of the most exciting stuff from around the world. These days we publish about 2/3 in translation, maybe 2/3 to 3/4 in translation, and that's about 40 books a year. So maybe we publish a total of 40 books a year. So maybe 30 to 25 would be works in translation. And we kind of try to look all over the world and see what other publishers are missing or what excites us or what sort of backgrounds we have. There's a few people on staff that speak different languages, so we kind of just have to be resourceful and pick and choose what we're able to. But yeah, any given day I can be kind of researching an Arabic literature or Japanese literature or whatever sort of seems appropriate at the time. So as I said earlier, I've been at New Directions for maybe 10 years. I started as an intern there. The day-to-day, it's hard to say. I think a lot of what I do is kind of maybe slightly boring administrative things like writing lots of emails and trying to
boring. I had no idea.
But I think I guess this is true of a lot of publishing, but a lot of the most interesting things that we find are through friendships with translators and other editors abroad and other writers. And so I keep maintaining all of those friendships. I think is important to all of us in New Directions. And I think that's how we find a lot of our interesting stuff. You can kind of just pick whatever's interesting to you at the moment and pursue that. And and then besides sort of scouting literature, there's the process of actually editing the translations that come in, and then as I said, the sort of administrative things that come with running helping a small company. There's about 10 of us on staff, so everyone has to do a bit of everything.
As in many independents, it's like the best bit and the worst bit is that you
Yeah,
work
exactly.
do you actually like, are you sort of a line editor? Like, is there like a favorite bit of editing? Like, do you tend to sort of come in once a translation has mostly been done, or like a book has mostly been written, and then have a look at it? Or do you sort of have more of a relationship from the beginning of a book?
Well, it totally depends on the different project, but I think most of the time I'll come in and start editing once, if I'm working on a translation, once it's already been translated. And I mean, in general, we don't really change a book for an American audience. So we don't like, cut chapters or, do any sort of abridging. And that, yeah, so lots of close line editing. I think one thing that we're really sensitive to is making a book sound really good in English. And I know that like probably lots of other houses say the same thing, but I think in the US at least, some of the translations that were coming in over the last 100 years or something were through academia. And academics are some of the most knowledgeable and thoughtful people, but some of them aren't the best writers. And so I think that we've really intentionally tried to, publish and edit translations that sound as good as if they were being written in English, or, try to make the language sing in English. In a way, and stay close to the original and not butcher things too much. But yeah, I think, yeah.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I noticed that you sort of, out of sort of a recent catalogue, you have been so I know that there's a lot of books in the UK have been published by Fitzcarraldo, and I was wondering, like, how does that relationship work? As sort of, are you two both going in joint on commissioning a translation? Is one of you like, what's the relationship there between, like, because I've got a few, or I've lent out Hurricane Season, but Hurricane Season and Minor Detail are two sort of my favorite books the last few years. So I was wondering, how does that look like for people who might not be familiar with the the split, because it's, it's both English speaking markets, there's a little bit of translation difference there. Yeah. What's that look like?
Well, it's kind of, yeah, it's kind of case by case. I think that a few years ago when Fitzcarraldo was founded, Jacques Testard, the publisher, reached out, and he's since become kind of a friend, but I think that we have really similar tastes and affinities, and we realize that about each other. And so, if he's really excited about a project that he thinks could be right for New Directions, he'll kind of let me know about it, and I'll often do the same. And at this point, we share several translators, and so, if a translator pitches to him, then I'll sometimes forward that to, or if it comes into him, he'll forward it to me. But yeah, I think it's more just an affinity of taste. And so for like minor detail, which you just held up, Fitzcarraldo had found that one and contacted, they were selling it in a US audience, and we were really excited by it. Actually, that one was even stranger. He and Barbara Epler, the publisher of New Directions, had a joint interview together, and it had come up that Fitzcarraldo was publishing an Arabic book, and so Barbara emailed him, and then we read the sample. It's a sort of just sharing across the pond, and
yeah. What is it? See, like that affinity there, and sort of you were mentioning earlier, New Directions has a very much, same as Fitzcarraldo, a literary fiction sort of angle. Do you think that sort of specializing helps an independent publisher exist, or like sort of what would you say is sort of, I don't know if it's key to sort of how an independent publisher, there are many different paths through the minefield of surviving as a publisher, but like, do you like that it's a specialist publisher in some ways?
I think so. I think that, like, someone coming into a bookstore and picking up a New Directions book off the shelf can expect something like weird and something that they might not otherwise get from another publisher. And when I started to read serious books, when I was 18 or so, I really gravitated toward New Directions books because a lot of them were in translation, and I was interested in the rest of the world, but also because they were sort of so different from what other people were publishing. And I think that it's helped us to have this identity as an experimental press that is kind of taking risks on books that other publishers might otherwise not. And I think that Fitzgeraldo is maybe doing something similar. There's also a lot of other really terrific UK-based presses that we share things with, like And Other Stories and Pushkin and Granta and like imprints like Harville Secker and Vintage. And yeah, it really helps having lots of relationships with UK publishers so that we can kind of figure out yeah, what the other's interested in.
That's so interesting. You wouldn't have necessarily thought that. Like I didn't necessarily realize that obviously, like you can just sort of keep an eye out. Like, would it be like that? I'm wondering how do sort of, to the best of your knowledge, how do you feel like the two independent scenes differ, or more particularly, like I'm just quite interested in the sort of US publishing market as a whole, and what are its sort of defining characteristics, pitfalls, so there are a lot of it has a very different feel to it in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that even since I started working in publishing, there's a lot more activity in translations. So there's several sort of newish presses that have specialized in translations. Like I'm thinking of like Deep Vellum out of Texas, and Open Letter out of Rochester, and the great like Archipelago books, and like Europa. And so there, I feel like there's more people on the scene kind of doing interesting work like that. I don't know, like Barbara at New Directions talks about how there was much less competition. So in a certain way, it was easier to do things 20 years ago. But then at the same time, I think that like there are several imprints of big publishers that are taking translation seriously because there's an actual market for it. And I think that the like success of books like, like Elena Ferrante, Knausgaard, Han Kang have kind of proved that people are, American readers are interested in things that are outside of Brooklyn marriages and stuff like that. So.
What? I actually want to add to that list. The university presses can sometimes be good. There's University of Nebraska does a lot of poetry. University of Texas has a good like Latin American, specifically Mexican stuff. Yeah. Is there sort of how do being sort of New York based, does the publishing industry feel very centered around New York in the US? Like in London, in the UK, we have a real issue with sort of like that, and sort of that London is too central and that it's just not representative and doesn't need to be central. Is there a sort of parallel going on, or what's the sort of centers for publishing?
Yeah, I would have just like wholeheartedly agreed and maybe even gone on a rant like a year and a half ago. But I think that things have, even since COVID, things have changed, and everyone has kind of proved that they're able to like work remotely. And so I kind of imagine that publishing will change and become a little less centralized, especially because like there's so much like self-selection that goes into wanting to be in New York and work in publishing, and it really excludes so many people just economically. I mean, like the starting salary at a publisher, large or small, is not enough to live on in New York City. So yeah, I think it is too centralized, probably in the same way that London is, but I do think that there's interesting things cropping up around the country, and there's new sort of like literary communities, and like Deep Vellum, who I already mentioned in Texas, Will Evans is such a like kind of singular figure, and being able to like bring all of these people together. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to pick out a few books out of sort of the New Directions? I know they can be recent, whatever sort of springs to mind, to like maybe talk about something people might want to pay attention to.
Yeah, there's two right now. Okay, so I'm at this moment, I'm sort of a little bit preoccupied because I'm missing the Booker International Award ceremony. But I have, well, New Directions has 2 books on the list, and one is this really terrific sort of like memoir novel by a Russian writer named Maria Stepanova.
Memory of memory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is one we're also publishing with Fitzgeraldo.
Yeah.
And it is kind of sprawling and amazing, and it's just the type of book I love because it's totally unclassifiable. Like through, during the process of like having acquired it and reading the translation and editing it, we like switched back and forth from like novel to nonfiction to essay back to novel. So finally it's a novel, but it kind of covers so much ground. It's a whole story of the 20th century through this one Russian family and their ability, well, their luck and circumstances of avoiding most of the atrocities while still, and Maria Stepanova brings together all of these really interesting themes, and then she'll go on these really great digressions about like Roland Barthes and like selfies and Rembrandt and like the photographer oh my gosh, I'm for Francesca Woodman. I'm blanking on all these names, but yeah, it's so encyclopedic and amazing. And yeah, so that's one book that's really cool and exciting that's coming out. Well, that's come out this spring. Another we're publishing next spring, but it came out in the UK already, is this I actually don't know how to say her last name, but Olga Ravn's novel Raven. It's Danish. I always have a hard time. Her novel is called The Employees.
The workplace novel.
And it's terrific and totally bizarre, and it's amazing that I don't know that it's on the same list as Maria Stepanova's book, because they kind of in a certain way couldn't be more different, because The Employees is a sort of literary sci-fi novel that's a kind of like Marxist critique on work, but like without being obvious. And yeah, it's very cool. And yeah, I guess like, I don't know, I get really excited about the books that are like feel really singular. And one of the things that we often have difficulties is like with is that we have to have these like sales pitches, and in the sales pitches with our sales representatives, we're sort of advised to like think of which books that the books that we're publishing are like, and we always have a really hard time figuring out comps. And so I love that. I love trying to find books that can't really be compared to other books that have been published.
But the eternal push and pull between a marketing department and everybody else. Very much understood. How did you actually, I think, sort of in that, like, what is your personal interest in like story sort of to ending up in this role? Like, how did was it always that you loved reading, and particularly like sort of these singular books, this sort of experimental fiction, or did you sort of come about it to a roundabout way?
I think I've always loved kind of the more oddball books. I'm really interested in different narrative forms and different ways of telling stories. And I think the writers that appeal to me most are ones that do something, that tell a story in a totally different way, whether it's with different language or a different narrative structure. So yeah, I think that I loved New Directions books before I started working at New Directions. And in a certain way, I just feel so like blissfully lucky to be working on books that I love. Yeah.
I think I saw, I think you said this in an article, talking about the community that raises a book, and sort of the advice, that there is no such thing as a writer sitting in their garret, like struck by inspiration. And it's something I feel very passionate about as well, because I actually, I personally think that sort of 60% of writing is editing, maybe a little bit more. And actually, like, that's where everything happens, is in editing. And I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that community and about sort of like how, like, what else goes into a book to like get it to, you know, my hands.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of a depressing thought, but like that, I think that there's probably a lot of really good books that are just invisible because they were not published well or published right or something like that. And it takes so many people to publish a book well, and for the right book to reach the right audience. And yeah, so it's fun to feel like I'm a part of that process in a small way of just helping, you know, the right reader pick up the right book. And yeah, I mean, we have really great publicists at New Directions that are in touch with like media to try to get attention for a book. And sometimes we're a little disappointed when we think we've published a fantastic thing and it doesn't quite, you know, reach an audience for whatever reason. It's not the right thing at the right time. Or yeah, I mean, I guess there's just a whole string of people kind of helping for this one project or book to reach, yeah, as many people as possible. And it so seldom works out perfectly. But I guess that's kind of the fun of it too.
Yeah, can you think of one in particular? Maybe we can like tell people to go get it, that you thought was underrated or sort of performed based on like what you like what you think of the book.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, we like there's just always so many hurdles with like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Well, like a sort of recent difficult thing was that we published last December this really terrific book by a German writer named Judith Shalansky. It's called Inventory of Losses. It was published by Maclehose in the UK. And just, you know, just because of the timing and COVID and everything, we were meant to publish it last May, and so we had to change the pub date because it's a really interesting series of essays about things that used to exist but no longer do, and it's illustrated and it's in this beautiful package. So we really wanted to make sure that people could look at it in bookstores, because it's not the same like ordering a copy on Amazon as it would be to like go somewhere and hold a copy. So anyway, we changed the pub date from May, and then we had to change it to August. And then there's also, because of COVID, there's all sorts of production delays in the US, like paper shortages, and for a while Obama's memoir, there was so many copies of it that like it kind of clogged up all of the printers, which is great, but you know, it's hard for us because we're lower in the priority list than you know, Obama, and so
yeah, we're big sellers.
But anyway, yeah, we had to change the pub date so many times, and so it didn't quite get the kind of like booming reception that we would have hoped for if it had been, yeah, available in bookstores. And like, you know, every time you change a book's pub date, it kind of makes more complications. And then so that's one kind of example of. But there also just like there's so many great books on our list that we think should have an audience of 10,000, and it's like just a small fraction of that. So
I'm imagining sort of some of those are your sort of like Neruda's, your I can't ever say her name, Dasa Drinich.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Dasa Drinich. And like you've got like, I mean, I guess Clarice has quite a big, but like these are actually like, I think something that's different about you and sort of like other publishers that people might see at the festival is that actually these are quite big classics, and not that the other people we speak to aren't, it's that or shouldn't be or won't be in the future, it's that it's a different model, like they're publishing newer stuff or stuff sort of where the writer's more or less still alive.
Yeah.
And if that's the wrong way to phrase it, but what's it sort of how did those people who have had a big influence on their literary scene and then are published by New Directions, how does that sort of fit in with your list? And how does well, I mean, I guess that is a large part of your list, but like what's the relationship between that and sort of new fiction?
Yeah, I mean, I love kind of looking for modern classics because it's a way of kind of thinking about reshaping the canon in a small way. And often those come about because like a writer, an American writer will recommend something that has been out of print for decades, or we'll hear about something really great that that hasn't been in print or has only been like sort of marginally in print, or the rights for whatever reason will become available suddenly and we'll want to jump on it. And I don't know, I think it's a way of kind of like thinking about modern classics as a way of contextualizing the work that we do with more contemporary writers. But they kind of all blend together in a weird way. Like they're all in conversation with each other. Like I'll often, if we're talking about like acquiring a new writer, I'll maybe ask them who their favorite writers are, just so that I kind of have a sense of who they're writing for, or who they're in discussion with.
And then end up publishing their favorite writers too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I would say that in general, all of the New Directions writers are also very good readers. And I think that's maybe somewhat of a signature of our press, like people who are,
maybe an indicator of a good writer as well.
Yeah.
Let's see. Just sort of as to sort of wrap up, I guess I was wondering, I talked to a lot of translators here, and I was wondering, we often get the translator's perspective, and they all say their editors are lovely, never heard a complaint. But obviously, I was wondering what it's like as an editor who doesn't speak or hasn't read the text in its source language and is reading it now in its translated text. And I was wondering, is there anything in particular about, do you just edit it as if you ignoring the fact that it's a translation? Like, do you have conversations about that? Like a little bit of that kind of question.
Yeah, so like I said, again, it sort of depends on who the translator is and what the language is. I can kind of like, with Romance languages, sort of read them alongside, and if something sounds really weird to me, I can look at the original. But most of the time, like, it's pretty obvious if there's an awkward phrase that the translator is still working through something that they haven't finished working through yet. And so just like kind of like flagging those phrases. And it is a bit weird not knowing the original language and kind of like trying to adapt the English into that. But I guess, it's a sort of like process of like guiding the translator into something that they probably knew already and maybe didn't, either have the confidence or the sort of like time to puzzle something through.
Being that sort of sounding board. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I can't say thank you enough. It's really enjoyed this chat, and I'll sort of if anybody wants to check out New Directions, all link down below. And if anyone wants to see the rest of our festival, again, all linked down below. But thank you so much, and I will let you go and escape whilst we both go follow the international booker, I guess, for the rest of this evening. So thank you so much, Tynan. It's been lovely to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Not at all. Thanks so much, and bye.
Bye.
Bye.